welcome everyone who's with us today. And I'm going to start by also saying you can't see me because I've got some problem with my camera on my computer. So I'm really sorry that you can't see my face. So today's module is talking with young people for out-of-home care providers in the context of COVID-19. And today's module is the final of 4 modules. It's talking with young people about family and community, trauma, suicidality, and hope. And the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live, and recognises their continuing connection to land, water, and community. And the Centre pays our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders, past, present, and emerging. I also want to acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people with us in the room today, and to acknowledge that sovereignty of the land was never ceded. I'd also like to acknowledge, as I have in the previous 3 modules, the important role of carers in out-of-home care, especially in the context of the COVID-19 virus. I've said before, and I'll say it again, that carers obviously have your own issues to consider in terms of the impact of the virus on yourself, family, friends, community, as well as having the additional impost of caring for a young person in the context of the virus. So I just want to really acknowledge the important work that you do and work that is often undervalued. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So Oliver Sabaras from the Centre is moderating today's session. And today's the last session, so more than ever, it would be fantastic if people can share your experiences or ask any questions. And you can do this through the chat function in your button at the bottom of the screen, or it might be the top of the screen. But also just feel free to unmute yourself and join the conversation, because we've found in the previous 3 modules that there hasn't been a lot of contribution from people. People tend to be quiet. So please feel free to just jump in at any time, particularly because it's our last session today. There's going to be some polls during this session that'll pop up that Oliver will launch. So we ask people to contribute to those. With any polls, just to let you know that the responses are de-identified, so no one will know how you respond, so you don't have to worry about that. And also just to let you know, we are recording this webinar, and there'll be a link to the webinar that will be posted on the Centre for Excellence website. And finally, before we start, just a disclaimer that the information in these slides is a guide only. So they haven't been compiled by a medical or specialist health professional who with experience in COVID. There's not a lot of information about COVID today anyway, but if you do need up-to-date medical advice and guidance in relation to COVID-19, please refer to the websites at the end of this presentation. Okay, so
Joe, just before we start, Leanne said she's having sound issues. I don't know if it was just her or everyone. Can everyone hear Joe? Do you want to reply on chat or?
I can hear.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Leanne, I'll have to, yeah. I'll chat to you in the chat offline. But just continue, Joe. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. All right. Okay, so overview. The following presentation, as I said, is the last of the 4 modules, and each module provides guidance and suggestions for carers of children and young people in out-of-home care between the ages of 10 to 18 years during a crisis. And as usual, there are references at the end of this presentation. So just to look back on the 3 modules that we've already covered, the first one, how young people may be impacted by COVID-19. The second one had a focus on intersectionality and additional considerations in working with young people. The third one was responding to behaviours of concern. And this module is talking with young people about family and community, trauma, suicidality, and hope. So we'll launch into it. The learning outcomes for today. We're going to really reflect on the specific concerns young people may have about family, friends, or community members. We're going to reflect on the experiences of poor attachment and/or trauma and its impact on young people. We're going to look at how young people may be at higher risk of self-harm and/or suicidality, and how to respond if a young person self-harms or is suicidal. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion. And again, I really hope people will join our discussions, because some of the feedback we've had is that it's really useful for carers, and particularly as many of you are quite isolated because of the COVID virus context, to hear about the experiences of other carers. So the discussion is how many of you are dealing with young people's concerns about family. And I'm just going to, before we open this discussion, when I talk about family today, I'm just not talking about biological family. I'm talking about family of choice as well. And family of choice may include community members, friends, and any other person or people to whom the young person has a strong attachment. So, for example, for a young LGBTIQ+ young person, it might be their LGBTIQ+ community that they describe as their family. So it's a very broad definition of family. Okay, so I'm going to open the discussion again. How many carers have dealt with young people's concerns about families? Can people share their experiences? If you have, you haven't, what kind of questions or issues are coming up? Just feel free to unmute yourselves and join the discussion. Okay. Okay, so Kimberly's already shared she's not had any concerns. Would anyone, I'm sure that young people must have raised concerns about families for some people, or asked questions. Anyone want to unmute themselves and share? I'll give you another few seconds.
Jo, sometimes too, I think it's not only, like you say, the family that you're with, but the extended family they sometimes have more concerns for, because they can't actually see them to check that they're okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of wanting to explore, that really. However, you know, family's interpreted by that young person.
Yeah.
Who's speaking now? Sorry, I can't see.
It's Barb, Jo.
Oh, hi, Barb. Can you just say what kind of issues or questions have come up in your context?
Well, it hasn't been so much in my context at the moment, but I know that like there's some people, like some of the children do have concerns about like other family, whichever form that may take, that they do have concerns about, because they can't like actually check in and physically see that they're okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can tell them that they're fine and everything else, but it's very difficult for them to comprehend and understand that sometimes when they're young and they can't actually see who they're worried about for themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for you, it's thinking about the young people may be concerned about the health and well-being of family members.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, thanks for sharing that, Barb. I can see that Rebecca's posted that concerns about being excluded from families because of their contact in the community, and concerns about not being able to have contact with families because they have to stay in resi care. So that also makes sense to me. Thanks, Rebecca. Anyone else? Okay, so I shall move on. So I'm going to get Oliver to put up a little poll, if people can please. Is that poll coming up? If people can just fill these in, and you can put as many responses as you want, just to get a sense of some of the issues that you may have with young people. So yeah, just tick the boxes on your screen. And if you don't think any apply, that's fine.
Joe, it's just single choice. I should have put multiple choice. Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. You can only pick one. Sorry. Okay, a few more people. Great. Okay, we can end that poll and we'll share the results. Just great. Okay, so just looking at the poll, which everyone should be able to see on their screen. So some of the questions that people have raised, the most prevalent one is about how might current child protection arrangements be impacted. Again, people have noted when can I see my family? Are my family going to be okay? And getting information about family wellbeing. But the child protection issue seems to be the most prevalent. And I'm wondering, 7 people chose that option. Would anybody be brave enough to just to share what those specific child protection arrangement concerns have been with the young people you're working with? No? No one wants to speak up?
Yeah, I can if you like, Joe.
Oh, good on you. Thanks.
Like it's mainly like when the children have been having access like quite regularly, and especially the younger ones, they don't really understand why they can't go and visit when they're used to the visits.
Yeah.
There has been a lot of like several weeks now where it's only like been phone contact. Yes. And the face-to-face contact hasn't been happening. So that's where a lot of the the impact comes into play. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. I would have thought, yeah, that would have been a fairly significant change for a lot of young people in care, not being able to have their access visits. So feeling more isolated from family.
Yeah, especially some of them might have like 2 or 3 visits a week, or some might just have one, but they tend to know when that is, and some of them just don't like that change as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that, Barb. Does anyone else want to add to that? Nope. Okay. Well, I'll move on in that case. So thanks. I'll take the poll down. So we're just really going to look at talking to young people about family. So young people may have concerns about family. Some of them may include, can I still have contact with my family? Or what happens if a family member gets infected? Could my family member infect me? Could I infect them? Others may be concerned about broader issues to family. So will my family member lose their job? How might that affect me? How will I know if my family members are okay? Could my family member die? What happens if they need to go to hospital? And so I guess in terms of responding to these concerns, it's important to think that young people may not actually verbalise these concerns. You may observe their behaviour and then in speaking to them realise that these are some of the things that are impacting young people and are affecting their behaviour. For example, they're becoming more anxious, or more nervous, or maybe seeming a little bit more down or quieter. And that's because they've got these sorts of concerns. So as we covered in the other 3 modules, we know that it's really important to be upfront and factual, and also that outer care home providers should regularly check in to assess young people's emotional and psychological well-being, and that young people feel they have permission to ask these questions, and they may, you know, want to keep coming back to this question because they may hear on social media or in the news or whatever that the situation's changing. So they may need to ask these questions a number of times and be reassured that the virus will pass and they will be able to see their family again. It's also important that young people know that if any family or community members are impacted about the virus, that they'll be told, so that they're not spending time worrying about a family member being infected. So that will also relieve their stress and worry about not knowing what's going on with family. Okay, so we're all now going to kind of build on what we've just discussed to look at having another discussion, and I really hope people will join in through chat if you don't want to speak, or speak to the group. And Barbara, I'm really appreciating that you are doing this. And the questions are up on your screen. So which of the young people I support might be more vulnerable because of their family situation? Which of the young people I work with might be most worried because of the impact of self or on family? And how can I decrease this worry? And what resources can I use to support young people to maintain family and community connection in these times of isolation? It's great. Barb's already raised that the use of social media can be really helpful in maintaining connection with family, even though that physical connection can't be maintained at this time. But I'm curious to hear people's response in terms of those young people that might be more vulnerable. So would anyone like to share? And there's no wrong answers. It's just really checking in with your experience. It really helps others to hear about your experience.
G'day, Joe. This is Ben from Warrnambool.
Oh, hi, Ben. How are you?
Good.
Thanks.
I spoke with you on Tuesday.
Yeah, I remember.
With the other meeting.
Absolutely.
So just so people know, I work for Brophy Family and Youth Services, and my role is primarily in youth homelessness. So to address the first question, I guess I got a couple of young people who are at home at the moment with some family members who are in a situation where they've suffered, there's been domestic violence and abuse. So their concerns are whether or not they can stay there during this crisis, and if they do have to leave, where can they go? So I make sure that I'm in contact with them regularly, and just to make sure everything's going okay at home. So that's just a concern I have with that particular situation.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. And in that situation, Ben, is it the concern is magnified because of the context of COVID-19 about being separate from family?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. No, thanks for sharing.
And leaving, with the restrictions, leaving the house, there's more anxiety around will they, be exposed to COVID-19, and so there's an extra level of anxiety there, I guess, because if things do escalate at home, they may have to leave. Yeah.
Yes. No, thanks. I'm interested whether other people have experienced a heightened anxiety from young people in terms of fear of being infected or of infecting others? Is that something that young people in out-of-home care are concerned about? Anyone? Okay. I have got some comments in chat. So Melissa, thanks, has said that young people in residential care are most vulnerable as they rarely see the people in their houses as family, and their access to their biological family is more limited than usual. And yeah, so that absolutely makes sense about that social distancing, I guess, and not being able to have access. So thanks, Melissa. And Kimberly's also just mentioned that child-friendly resources that explain what COVID-19 is has been really helpful in explaining the virus itself and the importance of social distancing. And that's great to know that you're using those resources, because of course it's much more helpful for young people to deal with the implications of social distancing and separation from family if they really understand the reasons why this is happening. But Rebecca's also said she's got some young people with additional health issues that are really worried about being infected. So thanks for sharing that, Rebecca. And of course that makes sense too. If young people already have compromised health, then they're obviously going to be more concerned about getting the virus. I know also that last session, we spoke about, you know, the kind of impact of trauma on young people, and adolescence being an age of increased risk-taking. And some people commented as well that there's also can be a sense in young people of being invulnerable or putting themselves and others at risk. So not actually complying with government regulations about social distancing, and we spoke about absconding. So yeah, we're seeing both sides of the coin in that way. Okay, so thanks.
Sorry, Helen is just raise something there.
Great, Helen, thanks. Helen says some of the young people who are parents themselves have worries about leaving the house. Yes, that would make sense as well. And I'm guessing that may be because they're both worried about being infected themselves and therefore maybe passing the virus on to their child, or they're worried about the child being infected. Yep. So, okay, thank you, people, for sharing your responses there.
Some great answers there.
Yeah.
Great responses.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to really look at some of the questions that people may ask and also the responses that might be helpful. So young people may ask, what will happen if my family member gets the virus? And again, with any question that young people may ask, it's really important to actually help them to name or articulate the feeling that goes with that question. Because we know that many young people in out-of-home care, because of their trauma experience, find it difficult to be in touch with their emotional state or to name the emotion. So helping them to name the emotion they're feeling when they're asking any particular question can also help to alleviate that distressing emotion. So with this question, you might say, you sound worried about your family. That's pretty normal when people are getting sick. If that happens, they will need to self-isolate. This means staying at home and not having contact with anyone for 14 days. That might be really hard for you and for them. If that happens, we can look at how you can continue to communicate. Lots of people use social media to do that. That way you can still talk to them, and we'll make sure we keep you updated about their situation and recovery. So again, in that response, you're naming the emotion, you're giving them factual, easy to understand information, and you're reassuring them that you will keep them up to date with what's going on. Another response might be, in some situations, people need to go to hospital to get the right care. If that happens, we will let you know and we will work out with you the best way to keep you up to date. It's important to know that most people recover and hardly anyone has died in Australia. And again, it's that partnership approach, reaching out with young people. So it's a partnership between you and the young person in meeting their needs for connection with family or to gain information about family. Okay, please feel free to jump in with any questions, comments, suggestions.
It'd be great to hear if people experienced any of these questions themselves and how they handled it at the time.
Rebecca's also said, I've found that most young people don't realise they're concerned about COVID. They just have an increased level of distress and dysregulation because of increased community fear. So it is helpful to name it like you're suggesting and ask how they are going with it to try to bring these concerns to their consciousness. Yeah, that's a great point, Rebecca. And I think it is, as I said, that young people will have an emotional reaction, and it can be things like increased levels of distress or emotional dysregulation. So they're picking up on what's going on in the community, but they're not necessarily aware they're doing that, or they can't actually name that they're doing that. So absolutely to be regularly checking in with young people. We talked last module about how important observations are, that young people aren't actually going to come out and share what they're experiencing because they may not know. So a really important role of out-of-home care providers is that checking in and helping the young person to name their emotional state. So thanks for raising that, Rebecca. And other people, please feel to add to chat or just to talk would be wonderful, because there's about, I think there's about 23 people in the room with us today. Okay, I'll move on. So another common question might be, why can't I play sport or go on an outing or see my family? And a response can be, we know the virus is really infectious and it can be spread through coughing, that should be, and sneezing and contact with other people. The virus can live on surfaces like tablecloths, or clothes for many days. That's why the government has put regulations in place to stop people socialising except online. Again, it must be really hard not to be able to see your family or to play sport. We can think about what other things you can do while these new regulations are in place. I know it's important to you that you have visits, access with your family. It's hard that this has to stop for a while. Let's talk about how you can communicate with them in other ways. So again, it's the naming of emotions, the validating what they're feeling, that's normal, that's reasonable in this circumstances, and then trying to work with them to find an alternative solution that still complies with government regulation. Okay, any chats, any comments? I'd really be interested to hear from people if you kind of use this approach. Does it work? Helen's just put up, I work with a client with a disability and they were having a really difficult time trying to understand why they can't go to the gym or go out with their community. And it was adding stress to their parent who they live with. So yeah, that makes sense. And I think it was the second module we spoke about the importance of having developmentally appropriate conversations. So we don't just recognise chronological age, but actually recognising developmental age and thinking about how we give information to young people that might have difficulty with comprehension or understanding some of the terminology. So Helena, it would be great if you could say how you actually dealt with that, because your client has a disability, and I'm thinking it might be a cognitive disability. If you feel able to speak, or if you don't, maybe you could put something in chat. That would be helpful.
Hello, Jo.
Yes, who's this?
Yeah, Linnell from Uniting Wimmera.
Oh, hi, Linnell. Thanks.
How you going?
Good.
So I think where we're experiencing some difficulty is the lessening of restrictions where you can go visit. So the young people, in their minds think they can just go randomly shopping, but both are working. So explaining that, you could potentially shut down your work, you need to be seen to be doing the right thing. And yeah, I think that's a difficulty, and it's hard because both young people are working, but one does have an intellectual disability that, his comprehension is not the same, but they're in the same house and having the same conversations. It's difficult, and he had an anxiety attack last night at work. So I've got to investigate that further to see where that's coming from too.
I think, you've raised a really good point. And I think this presentation was written when social distancing was the norm. But I absolutely agree that now we're moving out of some of those restrictions. It's a fine balance because young people are having more freedom and can leave the house and so on, but we obviously still want them to comply with some of the social distancing measures. So, not to have physical contact, for example, and also to still be using that, hand sanitizer and hygiene, and to be mindful of how many people can gather in any particular group. So it's much easier to when it was just enforce this blanket rule that you can't have contact with others, was easier than now where the restrictions are being updated, but we still want to impose particular limits on young people's behaviours. So I can imagine that's a challenge. Linnell, is there anything that you would volunteer to share just in terms of where you've worked with that young person with a disability about how you get that information across? Anything that's been helpful?
Yeah, look, we're lucky to have a therapeutic specialist that we work with. But it's baby steps. Doesn't like talking about feelings much. So it's taking it slow and getting the right carer to be able to connect as well. Is important.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thanks, Linnell. Anyone else?
Hi, it's Teresa Norris. How are you?
Good, thanks, Trisha.
Good, thank you. Look, I work with a young person that has lost her mum and hasn't been able to have, obviously, contact with her parents or her uncles and aunties and her grandparents living in the state. And when she lost her mum, obviously she was very emotional and a lot of her feelings were suppressed. And she was pulled out of her uncle's home and auntie's home and put in out of home care. And that's become more evident of her missing her mum. And she talks about that constantly now and constantly to mum and who she calls her uncle and auntie mum and dad, and she says she has 3 dads and 2 mums, and that's okay, but she's showing a lot of emotion about missing her mum because of this situation, and she's getting quite upset on the phone when she actually talks to her grandparents now and to her mum and dad, her uncle and auntie. So we're going to try and introduce Skype for her.
Yes, yeah.
So she can actually visually see her family. rather than just be talking on the phone, so she can see that they're okay and they're there.
Yeah.
So that's how she's struggling.
Yes, no, that is a huge thing to deal with, a loss of a parent, and then moving into out-of-home care, and then on top of that, the COVID crisis as well. That sounds like a great idea, as well as having phone calls, to actually use technology that actually allows you to have face-to-face contact. So it's another step forward towards physical contact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I think Zoom that we're using today is actually, I found it quite easy to use, and I'm not a technology whiz at all, but it's quite easy to use, and another way of having contact with family. So thanks for sharing, people. Rebecca also noted that some young people are happy because they're scared of their family, for example, because of family violence or sexual assault, and it is less likely that their family will make contact during isolation. So it's important to allow young people to say that they are happy that they can't have contact too. That's such a great point. Absolutely. So we shouldn't assume that all young people are, emotionally impacted in a negative way because they've got reduced contact with family. In fact, for some young people, it sounds like it might be a blessing in disguise. Thanks for pointing that out, Rebecca. And Helen said she works with a client with a disability and they were having a difficult time, I've said that, trying to understand why they can't go to gym and see their community. Okay, so thank you, people, for contributing to this part of the discussion. I'll move us on. So we're just going to do another poll that Oliver's going to put up. And it's around just trying to get a sense of, are there any groups of young people that are more vulnerable than others? And Oliver, is this a poll where you just choose one response only? Oops. Oliver, are you there?
Sorry, I was muted. I'm just going to quickly change it to multiple choice. I'll be...
Oh, okay, great, thanks. It's interesting while you're doing that. Ben's just put in a comment that some young people are more engaged through using other forms of communication. Ben, would you be able to say something about that? I'm not sure what you mean by more engaged.
Yeah, sure, Joe. The old traditional methods of, catching up with someone in an office and having it with them that way, you'd have a lot of, well, not a lot, but you'd have some young people who wouldn't turn up or would often reschedule. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're meeting online via video chat of some sort, I find that they're often willing to do that, and they'll engage a lot more often than what they would if it was just a very clinical meet in an office.
Yep, sure. Oh, that's interesting. So do you think it's because social media is kind of less, video or whatever is less kind of confronting, or?
Yeah, that could be part of it, and also that's what they feel comfortable with as well. They might have grown up with they might have grown up with that type of communication. So it's not for all young people, but I've found for some, especially a couple who weren't very engaged, to become more engaged this way. So I guess that's a positive in terms of what's going on.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's good to hear.
Joe, I'm just going to go to poll 3. I know and I'm just going to fix up poll 2 because it's, and then relaunch it when we do poll 3.
Okay, we'll take. I'll move on. Okay.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Okay, so we're going to just move a little bit to attach.
Do you want to just move on, and we'll just do we can do the polls all at the end if you'd like later on.
Yeah, I'll just do this bit on attachment and trauma.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so as we've talked about in the 3 modules, many young people in care will have attachment issues and may have experienced trauma. And in the context of the virus, it means young people may be more prone to anxiety and depression, including kind of rumination and obsession. And I think people today have named that, that young people may be thinking a lot about family, ruminating about their concerns about family, or obsessing about the virus and people getting sick. They may be catastrophizing, so dwelling on the negative impacts of the virus. They may be hiding or acting out their feelings, or they may be expressing feelings and emotions through unsafe behaviours and behaviours of concern. So again, the role of carers is absolutely vital, and someone's already raised that the most important relationship a young person has at the moment is with their carer. And the carer is the person to provide support, stability, comfort and security in these difficult times. So carers are a kind of, I think, I imagine you're on a bit of a knife edge in a way, because you have to balance your protective, nurturing, kind of trauma-informed role at the same time with explaining and taking actions to ensure young people and community are safe. So I wonder if I'm saying there's kind of a tricky divide between that nurturing, caring, trauma-informed response and also that responsibility, I guess, of doing as much as you can to protect young people and the community. So I'm interested to hear from people, again, through chat or just sharing verbally. Have you experienced that? And how you negotiate that kind of dual role? Anyone want to say anything? And I guess I'll say it in a different way, that as a carer in these times, your emotional connection with a young person is, so important. Your protective and nurturing role. And you're also working with young people around compliance. And Ben's said that there are some social issues being raised. So young people don't want to be labelled or socially excluded because they may have had COVID. So there's a danger in young people trying to hide the symptoms. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that would be going through a lot of carers' minds about whether young people are going to disclose having symptoms of the virus, and how to talk to young people about the importance of disclosing, but also dealing with the emotions that young people have, the fear of what will happen if I get sick, what will that mean for me? Anyone want to say how they deal with that? Nope. Okay. I'll move on then. I guess in talking about attachment and trauma and thinking about the principles of trauma-informed practice, it goes back to the message that what's happened to you, not what's wrong with you. So important that young people are reassured, I guess, that if they do get the virus or do have symptoms of the virus, that they're not going to be labelled, that they won't be blamed, that there'll be a public health response. It's not about what they've done wrong or what's wrong with them. Again, it's having an approach that's non-judgmental, where you're curious about what they might be feeling and experiencing at an emotional and psychological level, that respectful communication, non-blaming, and also is absolutely mindful of the relational disruptions of not being able to see a partner, if they have a partner, or family or peers. So the responses that young people are feeling in the context of this virus are a normal response to an abnormal situation. Does anyone want to say anything about that? Okay, I'll move on. So we might go back now and lodge and put up the second poll, Oliver. I'll just say that, yeah, with attachment and trauma, I think people today have spoken about that young people's concern about physically not being able to see family. And of course, in the context of an experience of childhood trauma and attachment issues, those concerns are going to be more magnified. So the importance of having that trauma-informed response to young people and to recognise that it's another possible experience of a breach in attachment to someone. So it's going to be possibly more profound than for young people that aren't in out-of-home care. Is that poll? Oh, here's the poll. Okay, so we've got poll number 2. And this is really just to get a sense from participants of some of the groups of young people that might be more vulnerable. And you may have not noticed any particular group of young people in your care, or you may not have guessed that young people in your care, but it'd be interesting to see what people come up with. Looking at the results of that poll, it's not unexpected. So that young people with mental health issues, 50% of you said that they would be more concerned and vulnerable as a result of the virus. And we're going to go on in a minute to look at self-harm and suicidality. But it makes sense that the added impost of the virus would exacerbate, for example, existing anxiety, and even issues like not being able to see family or being concerned about family health might exacerbate young people's anxiety as well. So young people's usual or normal ways of dealing with emotional context that they might be experiencing have been removed in some ways, and particularly around physical connection with other people. So it makes sense that mental health issues are going to be exacerbated. A few people have already spoken about young people with child protection involvement. I would absolutely agree that young people who are new to out-of-home care are going to be highly vulnerable because they're new to this context of living in out-of-home care, and they're also faced with the ramifications of the virus. That makes sense. We're also going to talk a little bit more later about Aboriginal young people, and it makes sense that where they're disconnected from culture and country, that's absolutely going to be another area of vulnerability for those young people. Last week, we talked about LGBTIQA+ young people. Again, the supports that they get, particularly through peer connection, and of course, how those group of young people might identify family is going to mean that they're more vulnerable. So thanks. Rebecca's also noted that IOD was on the other poll, and she's noted that young people might not be getting drugs and withdrawing involuntarily or putting themselves at risk to obtain drugs is a higher risk, absolutely. And we spoke about that in the last module as well, that obtaining drugs for young people whose substance use both puts them at risk because they're absconding from care, but also because the virus can be transmitted through packages. So that's a higher risk for young people. And having to go into withdrawal because of not being able to purchase drugs is another issue for young people and carers to deal with. So does anyone else want to make any comments on this poll? Any, to elaborate a little bit more about your own experience with these particular vulnerabilities? Is there anything I've missed in talking about these?
Jo, just with the Aboriginal young people, we actually, with our clients, we actually provided them with like some cultural elements during this time, like didgeridoos and clapsticks and some paint to be able to do some cultural activities while they have been in isolation, which has helped them a bit.
That's fantastic to hear, Barbara. And I think the last part of today, we're going to look at kind of resilience and hope. And that's absolutely one of the suggestions for Aboriginal young people in particular, where we know connection to culture and country is so important. It's how you can facilitate that in the context of the virus. So that just sounds like a fantastic idea. Yeah, great. Barbara's also added that schooling, young people who are schooling, that's going to be an additional vulnerability. And of course, that makes sense where they're homeschooling, and it's also within the context of their emotional and psychological health and well-being. You know, what is it like for a young person who's gone to school to be actually sitting in front of a computer and homeschooling, and all the associated changes that that means for them. So thanks for raising that, Barb. And Helen's also said that with young people with mental health concerns, it's been very difficult not being able to have mental health face-to-face support, and the wait lists have also skyrocketed in this time. So thanks, that absolutely makes sense. Yeah, I imagine for many young people who have a range of therapeutic supports, mental health included, not being able to have access to those supports physically is a really big thing, because we know, I don't know, I always think there's a stronger connection with someone when you're actually there physically with them. But I guess, as Ben also pointed out, that for some young people, I'm imagining being able to connect with supports through the internet, for example, may also be a way of continuing to provide those supports. So it'll differ from young person to young person. And Vicky's also noted the capacity of the carer to support the child educationally. And I can imagine that would be a significant challenge for many of you. Okay, so thank you. Now we've moved on. We're going to start to talk about self-harm. So Oliver is going to put up the third poll, which asks who's concerned about the risk of self-harm in young people. Great. Okay, thanks. So, I mean, that's very distressing that nearly 80% of you have noted that there's an increased risk of self-harm in young people. It makes sense in terms of the young people, the group that we're dealing with, that would be the case. So we will go on to talk about self-harm now. So we know from the evidence that young people self-harm may do so to relieve overwhelming feelings and stress. So it's actually a way of dealing with distressing and overwhelming feelings. So we've also noted that it's so important in these times to monitor the mental health of young people closely, to talk to young people about their feelings in relation to the virus and how to manage these feelings in a safe way, and to give young people the opportunity to talk individually and collectively, and also give young people opportunities to process difficult emotions in a safe way. So self-harm will be an issue that most of you will be dealing with the young people, even when the virus isn't around. But obviously people are saying that this issue of self-harm's increased in the context of the COVID virus. So I'm interested to hear from people how you are approaching this issue. So, you know, what sort of strategies or what sort of approaches that you're taking to help young people at risk of self-harm to emotionally process the impacts of the COVID-19 virus. We could have a whole session on working with self-harm, but I guess, you know, in the context of this, these webinars, it's really just naming some of the impacts. So I'm interested to hear from you what's been useful or helpful in addressing.
It'd be very hard for new out-of-home care workers that sort of just enter the workforce to sort of have to sort of deal with these type of issues straight away.
Absolutely.
I could imagine.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Melissa. I think one of the things I've noticed with young people often, especially at the moment more than usual, is that lack of feeling of control or power over their own life. So anywhere we can give them opportunities to have choice and control over things, I have seen sometimes a reduction in self-harming behaviours as a result of that.
It makes sense, doesn't it? Because self-harming can also be a kind of strange way, but a way of having control over emotions. It actually helps young people to minimise the intensity of emotions, and it makes them feel they're actually in control because they're taking this action. Conversely, if a carer can help a young person to give them some capacity to make decisions, again, it goes back to what I said before about a partnership in this together, working together rather than having things done to them as much as is possible in this context. That's absolutely going to help to reduce their feelings of wanting to self-harm. So thanks for raising that.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to add anything?
So we've just got 2 points in chat there, Joe.
Yeah, I can see. Yeah, thanks. I just, really want to, I think what Melissa said is just so important as well, though, that it's how being creative about how you give young people a sense that they can start to have control or participate in decisions or have some direction. And that can be through really simple activities, even about what they're going to eat for dinner or making decisions about how their day is going to look. The more that you give young people a sense of self-determination, the more you reduce that sense that they may have of not having any self-determination in their life. So Rebecca said it's really hard. I find it tough not being face-to-face. I call more family members to advise of risk rather than just managing it one-to-one, as I can't see them, but their family members or other support people can. So absolutely. So that collaborative approach with other people that can support the young person and help them to process their emotions is really important. Helen says, as an outreach worker, when you're concerned about your contact with young people, it's really hard not being able to do welfare checks on young people in their home when you might previously have popped into where they are staying. Absolutely. And Barbara said, be that person to listen over the phone or Zoom. So thanks. There's some really good responses. So in relation to self-harm, there isn't a magic answer, but all the things that participants have raised have been really, really useful suggestions. So I'll move on unless anyone wants to say anything else. No? Okay. So we're going to move on just to looking at suicidality, and a similar poll will be put up by Oliver in relation to suicidality. So I'll get you to put that up now, please, Oliver. Great, thank you. So as you can see on the screen, about 40% of you said yes in terms of concerns about suicidality. Some of you said no and some were unsure. Looking at the results of this poll, the suicidality and the self-harm one, makes me also think about the importance of self-care for carers. Because if 80% of you are concerned about self-harm and about 40% about increased risk of suicidality, that's a huge emotional and professional load for you as carers to be sitting with. And particularly because the mechanisms and the strategies that you usually use to respond to these concerns aren't always available. So I'm just taking Rebecca's point that she put up before again about it's really hard. It's tough not being able to work face-to-face with young people. And also Ben's just shared that some young people are also exposed to others displaying suicidality. So it's not just the young person themselves, it's actually what they may see in the behaviour of other young people. So I can't emphasise enough the importance of looking after yourselves, and I hope that you're getting really good supervision and support because of the additional impost to the role that you are playing. We'll move on to just look at a little bit about suicidality. So I'll get that poll down. But obviously we know that young people who've experienced trauma can be of greater risk of suicide, and particularly with the additional stresses of the COVID. An increase in stress, anxiety and depression can lead to suicidal thoughts and actions. All of your agencies will have guidelines around working with self-harm, working with suicidality. So it's really, really important that you're aware of the existing protocols and practices to reduce the risk of self-harm and suicidality in your agencies. People have already shared the importance of really being emotionally present and available for the people that you work with, to start to build that kind of sense of self-direction, of self-efficacy with young people. But please, make sure that you're familiar with the protocols that your agency has in relation to self-harm and suicidality. We're going to move on, but before we do, anyone want to add any final comments or?
I was going to say the centre will be putting out a self-care for out-of-home care workers in the coming week or so. So yeah, I'll let everyone know that's available, and I'll make sure I sort of get that out to everyone. Yeah, that will be the same sort of free for everyone, and yeah, it'll be good to get a lot of people there.
That's fantastic to hear. Thanks. I might not do this question, but I might just go on to say, with suicidality, you might need to ask the young person about the degree of their feeling or the intensity of their feeling. And this is basic suicidality kind of training. So does the way you're feeling make you want to hurt or harm yourself? And you wouldn't just ask this out of the blue. It would have to be in the context of a conversation where a young person's actually talking about having really difficult feelings, or feeling overwhelmed, or you're just getting the sense that they may be suicidal. So you need to actually kind of check that with them. And again, it goes back to the fact that your agency will have guidance on doing a suicide risk assessment and how to respond. And of course, if you are concerned about a young person and suicidality, it's really, really important that you don't keep that to yourself, that you actually speak to a supervisor as soon as possible. Okay. So any questions or comments on responding to someone that is indicating in their behaviours or what they're saying that they may be suicidal? Are people confident that they can actually undertake a suicidal risk assessment? Anyone want to share anything?
I think Ben, did you raise Ben's point in chat?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Oh, cool. Sorry.
Anyone else? Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's Linnell from Uniting.
Yep.
Got one young person that has eating disorder, and it's, in my opinion, it's pretty extreme, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of support around our area. So there are concerns with a lot of the team members for that young person.
Does that come under behaviours of concern, like that sort of, that does that stem off that, like in terms of how they
It does. However, she has been suicidal as well. So
I mean,
in the past,
with an eating disorder, obviously it could get to the point where it's life-threatening. But in your particular, can I ask whereabouts this young person is based?
We're in Horsham.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, gee, that must be hard. I know there's a lack of services in Horsham. Are you getting some support from, say, for example, a mental health service? Or
yes. Yeah. It just doesn't feel like we can do enough, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Origin, they're like you might not have heard of, you might have. They've got some really good resources in regards to eating disorders. They've got like webinars. They've got a few other. I think they've got like a fact sheet hub. They've got, in terms of resources, they're one of the for mental health sort of and issues like these. They're really good.
I'm really picking up on Linnell note, though, that, and I'm sure many other people in the room with us today are experiencing that. It's really hard as a carer when you're sitting with a young person and you're feeling that the support that is available kind of isn't kicking in or isn't really as effective as you'd like it to be. So you're, in a way, you're holding the baby. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Look, it's not in my particular home that I'm supervising, but it was a young person I did start off with, and you feel like you just want to fix them, but and then not having the connection because it is another house. So it is that. Yeah, and hearing, because I do supervision with the staff at work in that house, and hearing their concerns and their angst in it as well. That's where it lies with me, and just what else can we do? But I think what we're doing is everything we can do with what we have anyway. But it's just it really is just a concern throughout, really.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think the last module I spoke about, it's a bit of a maxim, but you can only do what you can do. But that can be really hard to sit with, to recognise the value that all carers bring to this support for young people, and to be able to not be hard on yourselves, I guess, and to acknowledge that you're doing the best you can in a really difficult situation. But that can have negative flow-on effects for you, or not you personally, Linnell, but as carers. But that kind of tension with working with young people with a whole range of maybe challenging behaviours and really intense and strong emotions, how you work with them, but you can only do the best you can. Sadly, there's no kind of magic fix to dealing with things like eating disorders or self-harm or suicidality.
How do you manage to get to not get too emotionally attached, like to obviously the situation, and still build relationships, like sort of and actually see positive changes in the kids and I can imagine that would be really difficult. That balance of that, that would be very hard.
It is, but I've been doing it for 8-9 years, I think. So, but when it comes, to the point where you think, geez, how close, it could be to, there is always that thought, I don't want to, see a child lost in care.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course. I think the whole, the self-care module that's coming up will probably look at that vicarious trauma. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but that looking after self is absolutely going to be
it is.
And having really good supervision, I think, is really, really important.
It is the frontline staff that that I'm concerned for as well. Or more so than myself, because I don't actually work with the young person, but I feel like you just feel like you want to go in there and there's not one one person that can can do that. So
no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Lynelle. I'm sure that was a really helpful reflection for everyone that's with us today. Does anyone else want to say anything or move on? Okay, don't forget you can put something in the chat box if you'd like. We are going to move on. We're coming to the end of today. So we are going to talk a little bit about hopefulness and resilience. We've got a video that we're just going to watch. It's 5 minutes. And then we just got a few more slides to go after that. So Oliver, I'll get you to put that video up, please.
Just give me 10 seconds.
So it's Michael Carr-Gregg talking about building resilience in young people. Although it's targeted more to kind of parents, there's some really good tips around resilience, which is why we're seeing this little clip. If Oliver can get it up.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg. I've been asked by Queensland Education to help.
Can everyone hear it?
It's frozen?
Yeah, can everyone hear it?
Oh, yes.
Yep, cool.
Yep.
Yep, cool. All right.
Help parents and teachers work together to boost the well-being and learning of young people. One of the most important topics we're going to be talking about in this series is the idea of resilience. That's the capacity of young people to face, overcome, and be transformed by adversity. While we all want to ensure that our children lead engaged, meaningful, and pleasurable lives, the reality is that random and chaos happens in the universe, and that almost all children will face some degree of adversity as they grow up. The truth is that all of life's important lessons are usually accompanied by a degree of grief, pain, and suffering. Children learn through good and bad experiences, and it's often through our mistakes and challenges that we learn how to cope. Another important component of this series will be a discussion of the idea of resilience. Now, in every young person, there are a balance of risk and protective factors that determine how they'll cope when faced with adversity. These processes can be individual coping strategies, or may be helped along by good families, schools, communities, and social policies that make resilience more likely to occur. In this sense, resilience occurs when there are cumulative protective factors. These factors are likely to play a more and more important role the greater the individual's exposure to cumulative risk factors. The phrase risk and resilience in this area of study is quite common. Of all the gifts we can give children, it would have to be one of the most important. Now, research tells us that there are 5 key components to resilience. Social and emotional competencies. These refer to one's ability to express or release one's inner feelings. It implies an ease around others and determines one's ability to effectively and successfully lead and express. It is described as the essential social skills to recognise, interpret, and respond constructively to emotions in yourself and others. Islands of competence. This is the extent to which young people are actively engaged in art, music, dance, sport, and drama. The presence of a charismatic adult in their lives. Do they have someone who makes them feel safe, valued, and listened to? Positive self-talk. Positive self-talk is any thought you think or any speech you say to yourself that uplifts your social, moral, spiritual well-being and results in improvement. Positive self-talk can be used for greater confidence, adopting a healthier lifestyle, and reducing stress. Connectedness. It is a sense of being a part of something larger than oneself. It is a sense of belonging, or a sense of accompaniment. The American Psychological Association suggests 10 ways to build resilience, which are: 1, maintaining good relationships with close family members, friends and others. 2, to avoid seeing crises or stressful events as unbearable problems. 3, to accept circumstances that cannot be changed. 4, to develop realistic goals and move towards them. 5, to take decisive actions in adverse situations. 6, to look for opportunities of self-discovery after a struggle with loss. 7, developing self-confidence. 8, to keep a long-term perspective and consider the stressful event in a broader context. 9, to maintain a hopeful outlook, expecting good things and visualising what is wished. And 10, to take care of one's mind and body, exercising regularly, paying attention to one's own needs and feelings, and engaging in relaxing activities that one enjoys. Learning from the past and maintaining flexibility and balance in life are also cited. Remember, Voltaire said, "No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible." Teaching these skills is a parental responsibility that cannot be outsourced to anyone else.
Thanks. Now, I really want to emphasise again, I know that clip is for parents, and I really disagree that the responsibilities can't be outsourced because of the work that you do. You are, in fact, taking on many of those tasks as if you were a parent. But I know some of the ideas in that DVD are not applicable to the context of out-of-home care. But I thought it would be useful to show, just because there are some things that are relevant in terms of helping to build resilience in young people. For example, particularly around creativity, and we will talk about that in a minute, but also as a carer being a key person that the young person can trust and build a relationship with, so that connectedness that you have with a young person. And also how you build connectedness and a sense of community, both in the context of COVID-19 and also because that young person is in out-of-home care. So we're going to spend a few minutes looking at hopefulness and resilience. And I know most of the modules so far have focused on the challenges of the virus, but it's so important that at the same time, we instill a sense of hopefulness in the young people with whom we work. And some of the suggestions for doing this are, you would have seen so many kind of positive messages and little innovative projects that are going on across the world and in Victoria. And they have included things like choirs, performances, art projects, social messaging. So that's a way that you can think about how to involve a young person in that, for example, or to even get young people in their own communities. You know, maybe in a regional community, there's some kind of project a young person can get involved with that's online and is around hopefulness and resilience. Someone before mentioned working with Aboriginal young people and the connection to culture and country. So intersectionality is a really important thing to think about, both in terms of assessing risks to young people, but also in celebrating difference and building resilience. So that can be, for example, for Aboriginal young people, it might be about how you can enhance connection to land and culture and link Aboriginal young people with community in order to build hopefulness and resilience. And I've already seen there's quite a few little video clips on the internet around Aboriginal resilience and hopefulness in the context of the virus. For example, with LGBTIQ+ young people, you can also look at that amazing sense of community that is also expressed online through different kind of performances or singing. So it's about being creative and thinking about how you can do that with the young people with whom you work. So I guess in terms of resilience, it is important to consider what you can do in your own specific context to build resilience. People have used things like yoga, mindfulness, meditation and exercise to make a difference. You can support Aboriginal young people and also to emphasise to them that historically young people, Aboriginal people, have had such a high level of resilience in order to resist the impacts of colonisation and stolen generations, for example. So connection to culture and country is absolutely resilience building. The other thing that we know is that when young people's self-efficacy is emphasised and acknowledged, so where they make decisions themselves, where they do something well, where they play a role in determining their own futures, that builds resilience in young people, and it actually stands in opposition to the influence of shame. So we know that when young people experience trauma, it's an experience of being disempowered, and a byproduct of that is feeling shame that I should have stopped this, shame about the way they responded. Many young people in out-of-home care have an overwhelming sense of shame. So the more that we can involve them in activities that makes them feel they have a role in self-determination and they demonstrate self-efficacy in doing something good, however small, it actually starts to build a sense of self-worth, and that stands in opposition to the influence of shame. So I'm going to pause for a minute because it would be fantastic to hear from people through chat, but particularly verbally as we're finishing up the last module now, on what you've done in your own particular context to help build resilience in young people. And yeah, to actually to build a sense of hopefulness as well. So
what slide are we up to here? Are we up to the discussion slide or the poll slide? Did you want to do?
I'll just do this discussion, then we can move on. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I'd really love to hear from people, and I'm sure other people would like to. Okay, so Helen said some of the young people have explored mindfulness through online. So that's great to hear. And there's some really great apps like Smiling Mind. Some people use that are particularly good for young people. Thanks, Helen. What about other people? I'm sure that you are trying to build a sense of hopefulness. We'd love to hear how you're doing that. Okay, no one else?
No, sorry, Jo. I think we just talk about, you know, in the future when things have calmed down, what we will do. So we keep that in mind.
That's fantastic. So it's that future focused orientation that we're not just stuck in this as if it's going to go on forever. It won't. Yeah.
True.
Yep. That's good. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone else?
If it's currently not a big issue within the house or within the resi unit, is it worth sort of dwelling on it or sort of keeping them distracted, like in terms of doing other, like sort of talking about other things, or just sort of not dwelling on coronavirus too much?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's what we're talking about in terms of resilience and hopefulness. It's around getting into another headspace as well as acknowledging the reality of the virus. Ben's talked about placing emphasis on perspective. So the situation provides a chance to reassess goals and motivations. That's great to hear. And Rebecca's talking about using positive affirmations or using I remember when you have a particular strength. So even if you've forgotten it, I'm going to remind you till you remember. So absolutely that strengths-based approach in supporting young people, and also reminding them of those past strengths to help them get through this current time.
True.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
I just thought of something we've done with the staff here, but I don't think I've explicitly done it with the young people, which is reflecting on a challenging time we've gone through previously and how we've grown and overcome things because of that challenge. And I think that's just made me think that's a really good conversation to have with my young people.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thanks. And it's what Michael Carrick was saying before about actually acknowledging strengths, how you've coped with something in the past has helped the young people or the person to learn skills, to learn strategies, and they can be used in the current context as well. So thanks for sharing that. Anyone else? Okay. But thank you, everyone. It sounds like a lot of people are putting really positive strategies in place and are recognising how important it is to build a sense of hopefulness and resilience. So hopefulness, remember there are positive messages we can give young people during these difficult times, and they can include things like absolutely reminding them, I care for you, I'm doing everything possible to protect you. The current situation will end and things are improving every day. The government is doing everything possible to prevent the virus and respond. People are getting help and your feelings matter. So it is important to draw young people's attention from the virus while also acknowledging it's there, and reassure them that things have changed and will continue to change and they can still enjoy life and do fun things. So I'm not going to, I guess, Oliver's put up another poll, the final poll. So maybe people can just fill this in and then we'll be finishing off for today. Just to get a sense of what people might be doing.